James Webb Space Telescope.
The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, is a space telescope designed primarily to conduct infrared astronomy. As the largest optical telescope in space, its greatly improved infrared resolution and sensitivity allows it to view objects too old, distant, or faint for the Hubble Space Telescope. This is expected to enable a broad range of investigations across the fields of astronomy and cosmology, such as observation of the first stars and the formation of the first galaxies, and detailed atmospheric characterization of potentially habitable exoplanets.
The topic: James Webb Space Telescope in overview. Telescope.
A telescope, from the ancient Greek tau lambda epsilon, Romanized tele phar and sigma kappa omicron pi epsilon nu, scopian, to look or see, tau eta lambda epsilon sigma kappa pi omicron, telescopus farseeing, is an optical instrument using lenses, curved mirrors, or a combination of both to observe distant objects, or various devices used to observe distant objects by their emission, absorption, or reflection of electromagnetic radiation.
Optical telescope element.
Optical telescope element, OTE, is a subsection of the James Webb Space Telescope, a large infrared space telescope launched on December 25, 2021, consisting of its main mirror, secondary mirrors, the framework and controls to support the mirrors, and various thermal and other systems. The OTE collects the light and sends it to the science instruments in Webb's Integrated Science Instrument Module.
James E. Webb.
James Edwin Webb, October 7, 1906 to March 27, 1992, was an American government official who served as Under-Secretary of State from 1949 to 1952. He was also the second appointed administrator of NASA from February 14, 1961, to October 7, 1968. Webb led NASA from the beginning of the Kennedy administration through the end of the Johnson administration, thus overseeing each of the critical first manned missions throughout the Mercury and Gemini programs until days before the launch of the first Apollo mission.
Space telescope.
A space telescope or space observatory is a telescope in outer space used to observe astronomical objects. Suggested by Lyman Spitzer in 1946, the first operational telescopes were the American Orbiting Astronomical Observatory, OAO-2, launched in 1968, and the Soviet Orion 1 ultraviolet telescope aboard Space Station Salyut 1 in 1971.
Optical telescope.
An optical telescope is a telescope that gathers and focuses light mainly from the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, to create a magnified image for direct visual inspection, to make a photograph, or to collect data through electronic image sensors.
James Webb Space Telescope Sunshield.
The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, Sunshield is a passive thermal control system deployed post-launch to shield the telescope and instrumentation from the light and heat of the Sun, Earth, and Moon. By keeping the telescope and instruments in permanent shadow, it allows them to cool to their design temperature of 40 kelvins, 233 degrees C.
Spacecraft bus, James Webb Space Telescope.
The spacecraft bus is the primary support element of the James Webb Space Telescope, launched on December 25, 2021. It hosts a multitude of computing, communication, propulsion, and structural components. The other three elements of the JWST are the Optical Telescope Element, OTE, the Integrated Science Instrument Module, ISIM, and the Sunshield.
The topic: telescope in overview. Hubble Space Telescope.
The Hubble Space Telescope, often referred to as HST or Hubble, is a space telescope that was launched into low Earth orbit in 1990 and remains in operation. It was not the first space telescope, but it is one of the largest and most versatile, renowned both as a vital research tool and as a public relations boon for astronomy.
Refracting Telescope.
A refracting telescope, also called a refractor, is a type of optical telescope that uses a lens as its objective to form an image, also referred to a dioptric telescope. The refracting telescope design was originally used in spyglasses and astronomical telescopes but is also used for long-focus camera lenses.
Radio telescope.
A radio telescope is a specialized antenna and radio receiver used to detect radio waves from astronomical radio sources in the sky. Radio telescopes are the main observing instrument used in radio astronomy, which studies the radio frequency portion of the electromagnetic spectrum emitted by astronomical objects, just as optical telescopes are the main observing instrument used in traditional optical astronomy, which studies the light wave portion of the spectrum coming from astronomical objects.
Reflecting telescope.
A reflecting telescope, also called a reflector, is a telescope that uses a single or a combination of curved mirrors that reflect light and form an image. The reflecting telescope was invented in the 17th century by Isaac Newton as an alternative to the refracting telescope, which, at that time, was a design that suffered from severe chromatic aberration.
The topic Space Telescope in overview. Spitzer Space Telescope.
The Spitzer Space Telescope, formerly the Space Infrared Telescope Facility, (SIRT), was an infrared space telescope launched in 2003. Operations ended on January 30, 2020. Spitzer was the third space telescope dedicated to infrared astronomy, following IRA's 1983 and ISO 1995-1998. It was the first spacecraft to use an Earth-trailing orbit, later used by the Kepler Planet Finder. The planned mission period was to be 2.5 years, with a pre-launch expectation that the mission could extend to 5 or slightly more years until the onboard liquid helium supply was exhausted.
Space Telescope Science Institute.
The Space Telescope Science Institute, STSCI, is the Science Operations Center for the Hubble Space Telescope, HST, Science Operations and Mission Operations Center for the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, and Science Operations Center for the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope. STSCI was established in 1981 as a community-based science center that is operated for NASA by the Association of Universities for Research in Astronomy, AURA.